Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Paymar, and you are listening to The Big Shift, the podcast that looks at the seismic changes our world, our economies, and our environments are confronting. Today, we're discussing the critical issues of conservation, preservation of habitat, and the wildlife that live on our planet. You might be stunned to know that more than 1 million species are currently on the brink of extinction, a rate not seen in 10 million years. To explore how we can help stop this cataclysm is Linda Lanzl, the founder of SAFE Worldwide, which stands for Saving Animals Facing Extinction Worldwide. SAFE is a nonprofit developing community programs and partnerships with wildlife conservation organizations across the planet. Linda, welcome to The Big Shift. Glad you could make the time.
Thank you for having us, Jim.
Linda, this period of time we're living through is being called the sixth extinction crisis. 1 million species, as I mentioned, currently on the brink of extinction. Can that possibly be true?
Yeah, what we're seeing right now is an unprecedented time where more species are going extinct in a small amount of time than at any other time in history for the planet, except for when 65 years ago, when we had an asteroid hit the planet, and there was over 70% of the species that died in a very short amount of time. This is only the second time in all of the other mass extinction times that so many species, whether it's plants, whether it's animals, or whether it's the animals in our oceans that are affected by extinction.
We're talking about all species, mammals, amphibians, birds, insects, plants. And over what period of time are we talking about when you talk about the sixth extinction crisis?
So what we're looking at really, when you're looking at the actual exponential loss of species, we're really talking about the last 200 years. But let's just give you a couple of examples of what's really going on. Since my lifetime, the population has actually doubled, and we're at 8 billion people right now.
Right.
Yet, over 60% of animal populations have been wiped out.
Mm-hmm,
and the planet has lost more than 1 billion acres of forest. And though there is deforestation going on throughout that time, it hasn't been able to keep up. And then you add the issue of the pollution that we're creating on this planet and the habitat loss. Just to give you an idea on pollution, since COVID, more than 60 million pounds of PPE and other COVID-related plastics have found their ways into our oceans and other waterways.
Yeah.
Those numbers are extraordinary.
And they keep growing. That's the problem. You mentioned deforestation. That's obviously a major cause of habitat loss for animals. And it has occurred in the world, exponentially in the last 30 to 50 years. Is this the main reason for the extinction crisis, the loss of habitat?
There's loss of habitat. There's also obviously a huge problem with illegal wildlife trade that has been going, the hunting of species, trophy hunting, such. But, when we're looking at the overall numbers, habitat loss, poaching is a big problem. Most people don't even realize that the wildlife trade is a $20 billion yearly industry that is affecting thousands of species and millions of animals every single year. And you take that with the habitat loss, which just are taking away more and more land for animals. Animals are losing their migration paths from one area to another. Species just can't keep going. And then you add climate change to that. Species are just not able to keep up.
this issue of wildlife trade and poaching. I mean, that's one issue that really makes my blood boil. Killing elephants and rhinos for their tusks, or making throw rugs out of tiger furs. I mean, I just don't understand how people do that, but they do. And you mentioned a $20 billion industry.
I mean, I want people to understand what this actually looks like. These are animals taken wild. I'll give you an example of one species. Chimpanzees are being stolen from the wild in Congo and in other areas of Africa at unprecedented rates because people think it's cute to have a baby chimp as a pet.
A pet, yeah.
As a pet. And what's happening is that for each baby chimpanzee that gets stolen, at least 8 to 10 other chimps who are trying to protect it are being killed and slaughtered for meat trade. And the baby is then taken and sold either in villages or in big cities. And worse, you're still seeing it on social media.
Aren't there laws against this? I mean, aren't there international laws against the wildlife trade?
Absolutely. Unfortunately, the problem is so huge. It's hard to really get a handle on it. The laws are there. The problem is enforcing those.
Mm-hmm.
It's just not happening. And there's a lot of corruption in some of these countries. And the issue is also that the poachers are becoming so savvy that they're using different routes, and they are going through the Middle East to find their way to China or even to Europe and to other places. The Middle East is a hub for stolen wildlife out there for the exotic pet industry. And very little is being done.
I've read stories about the police and the army and the military forces that have been set up to stop poaching have actually become targets and have been killed for trying to stop poaching.
Jim, more rangers are being killed right now than at any other time because 87s are making themselves available in these forested areas. And here's the other thing. You have areas now that are opening of mining, and because of the timber use, and those routes are now also being used by the illegal wildlife poachers. Mm-hmm, and they're getting in there, and they're not just stealing, they're stealing species from, hundreds of thousands of birds are being stolen from the Amazon every year. You have reptiles stolen from the wild. And some of these animals are 8 out of 10 animals that are in the illegal wildlife trade never make it out alive. They never make it to their destination.
Right. They're killed along the way. They die along the way.
They die along the way.
Right. Why should people care? I mean, and they live their day-to-day lives. We're all trying to deal with kids and schools and jobs and transportation, and we live in urban areas. And we don't think so much about Africa and Asia and the Middle East. But even here in America, ranchers and cattlemen are trying to exterminate wolves, bears, coyotes, and other species. Can humans survive long term without a healthy planet and biodiversity?
The impact that we're having on today, on the planet today, is going to impact humanity ultimately. And it's not going to even take that long. I mean, I think that in the past, humans have always taken a position, we need to conquer things on the planet. We need to conquer our waterways. We need to conquer the wildlife. And I think that we're seeing that this is not working, and that it's causing a slow death for all. Between climate change and the fact that our wildlife is disappearing at unprecedented rates, people are starting to wake up to that and saying, wait a minute, we don't want that to happen. However, what I've also noticed that people sometimes don't know what to do. And that's one of the biggest threats to the planet, is that apathy, or the fact that people don't feel like, well, I'm just one person. What do I do?
Talking about population growth, the evidence shows that habitat destruction is accelerating as the global population grows. It's amazing. I looked this up. The world population increased from 1 billion in 1800 to around 8 billion today, the figure you cited, and will hit 11 billion by 2100. I mean, what does this mean for the natural world?
It means that we are facing a possible extinction of the planet's ecosystems, biodiversity, and most scientists will say that the way we are treating our planet, other species, is going to have an impact and potentially be the demise to humanity. The planet's evolution has happened over the 400 million years, and there's a reason these species have existed. When you take these species out and there is an impact that goes down the chain, and predators like the wolves and beavers and even things like the starfish that help to minimize the mollusks in the ocean so that other species can survive, so that the corals can survive. If we don't pay attention to that and we create the demise of many of these species, we are going to be impacted ourselves.
Conquest by mankind. We've been destroying the habitat from the beginning of time, cultivating the land, cutting down forests, gas and oil exploration, agribusiness, diverting water supplies, building these massive dams, killing animals for food. Are we learning anything from our past behavior to put an end to the destruction?
I like to have hope. And today there are conservation efforts that are going on than at any other time. Scientists, universities, other NGOs, conservation organizations, local communities, and governments are really making an effort to curb the impact from humans and are coming up with bold and creative ideas to solve these issues. And technology today, technology can be used for a lot of people. Say, wow, technology has had a huge impact also on our environment, which is true because the mining that is required to create our cell phones, most people don't even realize it, but it's detrimental to our planet. But technology can also be a big driver in conservation today. And things like what Safe Worldwide does, which is we provide drones and camera traps to help with the monitoring of species. And it also helps to determine if there's poaching in the area.
Well, getting to this technological revolution around food, I was in Iceland a few years back, and they had this, it was a glass greenhouse, and it grew nothing but tomatoes. And they hung them upside down. They didn't come out of the ground. They were hung upside down. Thousands and thousands of tomato plants being grown indoors because, Iceland's in the middle of nowhere. So everything has to be shipped in, which makes no sense. And we now as a society after COVID have all of these empty office buildings.
Yes.
Doesn't it make sense? You live in the San Francisco Bay Area. I live in New York. We got a lot of empty office space. What if we converted some of these buildings to urban farms where the food was grown exactly where people live? And then you wouldn't have to transport it, creating more pollution. Do we see much of that in our society?
I think it's happening. I still think it's not happening fast enough. And the reason it's not happening fast enough is because we're not getting enough people saying to their government officials, enough. And we need to find solutions. Solutions are out there. But again, it's about financing. But there is a lot of financing available for projects like that. We just got to get the population behind us. And by the way, most of the are not people will say, well, the problems are in Africa because they're having so many children and all that. Actually, the problem is the Western societies that are using up the resources at much higher rates than any other countries, and including China and India.
And the waste of food in America, is monumental, but But we do need to eat, and we do need energy, or we wouldn't be doing this podcast. We created cities long ago, and water wasn't a problem in the past. Now it is. Population was far less than the 8 billion where we're at today. I mean, where do we go from here given our societal needs? We're not going to give up our phones. We're not going to give up our flat screen TVs. We're not going to give up our cars. We want electric lights. We need washing machines.
I think that it comes down to each one of us can do something. We can't just rely on the government to be the solution. So we always say, people ask me all the time, well, what can I do? Well, the first thing you can do is you can educate yourself on the various topics that you're interested in that have to do with the conservation of wildlife, and talk about the problems. Raising awareness is key to educating the public out there. And then the other people can do is they can volunteer and participate in projects in their local communities. I'm telling you, Jim, there are plenty of projects out there, things like tree planting events, or like one of the things that we're doing in Uganda, which is a community garden. And we are now branching out to doing a nursery, a tree sapling nursery, so that we can grow endemic trees and then continue with our tree planting projects for either endemic trees or fruiting trees that the communities there can use. So it helps with with the carbon, and it also helps to feed the communities.
I'd like to switch gears for a moment from the land to our waters. What about our lakes, seas, and oceans? We've been using them virtually as sewers. Filthy, toxic rivers flowing into oceans around the world. The amount of chemicals, plastic, human, and animal waste, it's impossible to calculate. And at the same time, we're overfishing.
I think that our ocean pollution is one of the biggest problems that mankind is facing, and we're not very much because we're so focused on climate change and all that, but we're not realizing that our oceans are telling us we're suffocating. Mm-hmm. One is that 90% of the fish population is gone out there, and people don't even realize that. And then the fish that they're eating today, a lot of it is farmed, and some of it is coming from sources that I personally wouldn't trust.
And it's full of antibiotics too.
I mean, if you look at, just as a small example, when you see your salmon, your farmed salmon, you'll look and go, oh, it's pink. Well, it's pink because they have to put a dye in it, because in today's world, the farmed salmon is actually gray. Mm-hmm. And the companies know that no one wants to eat a fish that has a gray looking.
Right.
Sharks have been so maligned, and sharks are a healthy component to the diversity of the oceans out there. And yet we're killing sharks at such alarming rates. It's causing an imbalance in oceans. We're saying that we're protecting our whales, and yet whales are beaching themselves at alarming rates these days. And we're hearing about more of these happening.
I mean, shipping around the world, these massive container ships. We now have invasive species hitchhiking on these tanker ships. They're often attacking native species when they arrive, with dire consequences. They're colliding into the whales and killing them, and they're getting beached. And the noise from these ships also disrupts their sensitive hearing and disorients them, not only whales, but dolphins and porpoises. This wonderful marine life, they're dying off, washing up on the shores in unprecedented numbers, and no one seems to be doing anything about it.
Again, I have to come back to this plastic pollution issue. Whales are being found on these beaches, and when the scientists are looking inside of them, you're finding 40 pounds of plastics in some of these whales, and that makes them feel they are full, but they're getting no nutrient whatsoever. That is happening at than ever before. Turtles, there's not a species of turtle out there on the planet that doesn't have plastics in their systems. And you got to ask yourself, if it's happening to these species, it's happening to all of the species fish that we're eating out there.
And then we're consuming the fish. Correct. And it's getting into our bodies. And these microplastics, we're actually breathing this stuff.
One of the reasons why we started SAFE is so that we could bring awareness to the issues and really do education, not just in the areas where we're working, but also in the Western on social media, because we honestly feel that education is part of the solution. You can use social media to get a message across and to teach and to raise awareness about what's going on out there.
You know, you just returned and you mentioned it, that on this fascinating trek to Borneo. The timber and agriculture industries have been clear-cutting rainforests there to grow palm trees. Palm oil is big money. It's in nearly everything. Like 50% of the packaged products we find in stores like pizza, donuts, chocolate, deodorant, shampoo, and toothpaste come from palm oil. It's also used in animal feed and as biofuel. Is there an alternative to palm oil?
Palm oil is one of the cheapest vegetables oil out there, and it's in everything. As you mentioned, literally you can't avoid palm oil in many cases. However, there are other options, and we have a right as consumers to say, wait a minute, palm oil is detrimental to the rainforest that we actually need to protect our planet's clean air, and we want other solutions. The palm oil industry is so huge and so vast because it is used in every country. But what countries can do now, where have a role to play in the sustainability of their communities' lands, is to say no more.
When we spoke a few days back, you mentioned there were some positive efforts being made to stop the deforestation and end the conversion to palm trees for palm oil on the land. What was happening over there in Borneo?
When I was there my first time in 2006, I was to see the deforestation that was happening. Today, what I saw made me cry. I mean, it was just absolutely sad. It was miles and miles of just palm trees everywhere. However, when we were there, met with organizations that were working to help reforest many of these areas. So one of the things that was happening is that organizations out there are coming up with solutions so that in these vast areas of just palm oils, they are getting palm plantations to agree to develop forest islands within these areas so that the wildlife that depends on trees and the native fruiting trees can migrate from one area to another. Areas of the palm plantations are being converted back to native tree forested areas, and more governments are holding palm organizations, palm companies
accountable.
They're holding them accountable.
Yeah, right.
And the community got together, the saplings from the endemic trees, and the area is repopulating itself as a forest again.
There are a lot of global challenges so that we can create a sustainable planet. And climate change, which we just touched on, is obviously having a horrific impact. Droughts mean no water and no food for wildlife. The die-off is staggering. Plus, droughts are causing massive wildfires where animals are losing their habitat. I think people really need to come to grips with what climate change is doing. It's not just that we're getting hotter and hotter every year, but it's destroying the very ability for our species to exist.
You're absolutely right. And At this point, I'm no longer even calling it climate change. I'm calling it climate extremes, because that's really what is happening. When I go into the Congo and I ask the local people there, or I go into a rainforest in Central America and I ask them, are you seeing the climate changes? They're saying, it may look like our forest is still here, but we're getting winds like we've never had before. And we're getting rainstorms like we've never had before. And yet our rains are shifting. They used to be during certain months of the year, and that's shifting. When I went to the Arctic a couple of years ago, specifically to see for myself, is climate change really happening like these scientists are talking about? And I can tell you that polar bears are suffering greatly, because the time between the ice formation that they need to survive, to be able to hunt for the seals, which is when they feed, it's during the time that the ice forms, coming lesser and lesser. And so these polar bears are going for longer periods of time.
And they're starving. They're starving to death. And other species, orangutans, tigers, elephants, rhinos, many other species, they're increasingly isolated from their sources of food and shelter. And then you put that into the context of human and wildlife contact, which increases the chances of conflict, because without sufficient natural habitat, these species are often killed off or captured.
And that's exactly what's happening. If you look at the northern part of Kenya, which has suffered one of the worst droughts that we've ever seen, you're seeing more and more conflict between the wildlife and the local people there, because of the water sources so limited. And yet you're finding that Maasai people, they want their wildlife to survive. So they're, all of us, I think, in our own way, these communities are trying to find solutions. We are all on one planet, and this planet has actually become smaller if you really look at it. We're able to get from one place to another in a matter of hours. We have to recognize that we want elephants to survive. We want tigers to survive in the wild, because every single species, if they disappear, it's a part of us that dies away alone.
And you talked about hope for the future. And you've told me that SAFE, Saving Animals Facing Extinction Worldwide, is working on novel approaches to reverse the destructive trends we've seen over the past decades. Your approach is different from other wildlife organizations.
Yeah, so one of the why we started SAFE is because we really wanted to work with these small communities that are often forgotten by the larger NGOs or nonprofits out there. And so what you find is that there's a lot of communities that live near national parks where species live, and they're often forgotten. So Safe Worldwide likes to work with these organizations. We're also doing projects that are not the sexy project many organizations are looking to do. The one that we did in Indonesia, where we're the removal of invasive species of palms, so that we can take those out and provide more acreage for the Javan rhino to survive. And what people don't realize, there are 74 Javan rhinos on the planet. 74.
That's terrible.
And so they need every single bit of habitat necessary, will provide food for them.
The other thing that I found interesting about SAFE is that your organization uses 100% of the money that you receive for donations, and you plow it back into projects. What really made me angry was when I realized how much money some of these executives are making, like up to $1 million for a CEO who runs one of these wildlife organizations.
Yeah, we are 100% volunteer based. And none of our board members get anything. It's every 100% goes to our projects. Every penny that comes in from our donors goes to help either protect the wildlife or the habitat that they need to thrive in. And it's because we have these amazing volunteers from all over the place that are helping us either content or the educational projects that we put out there. We do help to fund the local people in the areas to make sure that they're able to find ways to survive or to do those projects. And I feel strongly, Jim, that if someone is giving $20, I think they want the $20 to go towards the cause and not to go towards marketing or administrative costs.
When I look at some of these lists and see people making $800,000, $500,000 a year, that's not where I want my money going to run some big institution and some big bureaucracy out there.
And I would hope that most of the people feel exactly like you do. I feel like this planet has given so much beauty, so much to be, that I'm in awe of, that I just wanted to give back because I felt like it was my responsibility to make a difference every single day, to make a little bit of a difference. And I feel like we can all do that.
Linda, we're running out of time. We are going to revisit these critical issues in the future, as they're not going away anytime soon. Thank you so much for taking time with us today to explain these critical environmental issues.
Well, thanks, Jim. I think it's really important that we remind people that there is hope, but action has to go with that. And without the action, we're turning away from the biggest problem that's threatening our planet. So thank you so much for having me, and it's been a great pleasure.
That was Linda Lanzl, the founder of Safe Worldwide, which stands for Saving Animals Facing Extinction Worldwide. And if you'd like to learn more about Safe Worldwide and the work that they're doing and how you might get involved, go to their website. It's real simple, safeworldwide.org. I'm Jim Paymar, and you have been listening to The Big Shift, available wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening today, and stay tuned for the next episode of The Big Shift coming soon. Stay tuned.